People who don't feel the need to impress experience validation very differently. While others perform, prove, and chase approval constantly, they exist without the weight of others' opinions. Not because they're arrogant, but because they've unlocked something most people never will. They're the ones who show up in regular clothes to events where everyone's overdressed, who don't name drop, who don't post every achievement, who don't need to prove they're smart, successful, or worthy. And while everyone else is performing for an invisible audience, they're just existing. But here's what nobody tells you about why they're like this. And trust me, the psychology behind it is deeper and darker than you think. People who don't feel the need to impress aren't lacking ambition. They're free from something that controls everyone else. And here's what took me years to understand. I used to be the opposite. I'd rehearse casual conversations to sound smarter. I'd buy things I couldn't afford to look successful. I'd carefully curate every photo, every post, every word to control how people saw me. I was exhausted, constantly performing, constantly proving. Then I met someone who just didn't. She wore the same outfit twice in 1 week. She didn't engage when people humble bragged. She didn't correct people when they underestimated her. And I realized something that changed everything. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, because she'd already impressed the only person who mattered, herself. But here's the part that breaks most people's brains. She wasn't more confident than everyone else. She just had a completely different relationship with validation. And once you understand that psychology, you can't unsee it. They've realized that impressing people is a game with no winning condition. And this is where it gets dark. Most people spend their entire lives chasing approval. They achieve something, get validation, feel good for exactly 3 days, then immediately need more. It's an addiction. And like any addiction, the highs get shorter and the lows get deeper. But here's what nobody wants to admit. No amount of external validation ever fills the void. People who don't feel the need to impress have already played that game, and they realize something devastating. You can be the smartest person in the room, and someone will still think you're stupid. You can be the most successful person in the room, and someone will still think you're a failure. You can be the most attractive person in the room, and someone will still find you lacking. And here's the part that changes everything. When you realize you can't control what people think, you stop trying. But here's what's interesting. They didn't stop trying because they gave up. They stopped trying because they saw through the illusion. Impressing people doesn't make you valuable. It makes you exhausted. And at some point, they chose peace over performance. Because you can't win a game where the rules change depending on who's watching.
They've developed an internal compass that doesn't require external GPS. Every person has 2 sources of validation, external and internal. Most people rely almost entirely on external. They need others to tell them they're good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. But people who don't feel the need to impress, they've built an internal system so strong that external validation becomes optional, not essential. And here's a story that'll make this clear. I had a colleague who got promoted to a senior position, huge accomplishment, life-changing salary. But here's what shocked everyone. She didn't post about it, didn't tell anyone unless they asked. When people congratulated her, she just said thanks and moved on. Someone asked her why she wasn't more excited, and her response was perfect. I'm excited, I'm just not performing my excitement for an audience. I already know what this means to me. I don't need anyone else to validate that. And that's when I understood. People who don't need to impress aren't emotionless. They're just not outsourcing their self-worth. But here's what makes this revolutionary. When you don't need external validation, you become impossible to manipulate. You can't be controlled by compliments or crushed by criticism. You just exist. And that freedom, most people will never experience it, because they're too busy performing for an audience that isn't even paying attention. They've accepted that some people will underestimate them, and they're okay with that. This is what breaks people's brains. Most people need everyone to see their value. They can't stand being underestimated. They need to prove they're more than what people assume. But people who don't feel the need to impress, they've made peace with being underestimated. And here's why that's powerful. When you're okay with people thinking less of you, you become free from the exhausting work of managing their perception. But here's what this looks like in real life. Someone assumes they're less educated. They don't correct them. Someone assumes they're broke. They don't flash their bank account. Someone assumes they're not ambitious. They don't defend their goals. And here's the part that's wild. They've realized that people who underestimate them don't matter. And the people who matter don't underestimate them. But here's where it gets even deeper. There's something incredibly powerful about being underestimated. It gives you freedom. No one's watching you. No one's expecting greatness. So you can operate without pressure, without performance, without the weight of everyone's expectations. And here's the twist: while everyone else is busy proving themselves, they're busy building themselves. They're busy building themselves. And by the time people notice, they're already miles ahead. Because they weren't performing for an audience, they were working for themselves. They've learned that the people who need constant proof aren't worth impressing anyway. Here's something most people never realize. The people who demand constant proof of your worth are the people who will never be satisfied. They'll always need more. More achievements, more success, more evidence that you deserve their approval. But people who don't feel the need to impress have figured something out. The people worth having in your life don't need you to prove anything. And here's what that looks like. Think about the people you genuinely respect. Do they constantly brag? Do they name drop? Do they post every achievement? Probably not. The most impressive people you know are often the quietest about it. Because real confidence doesn't need an audience. But here's where it gets painful for most people. When you stop performing, some people will leave. They'll lose interest. Because they weren't interested in you. They were interested in the show. And when the show ends, so does their attention. And people who don't need to impress have accepted that loss. Because they'd rather have a small circle of people who see them than a large audience that only sees their highlight reel. But here's the beautiful part. The people who stay, they're the real ones. They're the ones who see your value, without needing constant evidence. And that's worth more than impressing 1,000 people who don't actually know you. They've realized that impressing people often means betraying yourself. This is the dark part nobody talks about. Every time you try to impress someone, you're making a choice. You're choosing their opinion over your authenticity. You're performing a version of yourself that you think they'll approve of, instead of being who you actually are. And people who don't feel the need to impress have done the math. The cost of impressing people is too high. It costs your authenticity, your energy, your peace, your sense of self. But here's what this looks like in practice. Someone tells a joke they don't find funny. Most people laugh anyway. People who don't need to impress just don't laugh. Someone asks their opinion on something they know nothing about. Most people fake knowledge. They just say, "I don't know." And here's what's fascinating. These tiny moments of authenticity add up. Every time you choose truth over performance, you strengthen your relationship with yourself. Every time you choose your values over others' approval, you become more solid. But here's the cost that most people aren't willing to pay. When you stop performing, you become unpredictable to others. They can't figure you out, can't categorize you, can't control you. And that makes people uncomfortable. So they'll call you cold, weird, standoffish, arrogant. But people who don't need to impress have learned something crucial. Being misunderstood by people who don't know you is better than being validated by people for being someone you're not. Because at the end of the day, you still have to live with yourself, and they've chosen to like the person they see in the mirror. They've found something more valuable than admiration, self-respect. Here's what changes everything. Most people are chasing admiration. They want to be looked up to, respected, envied. But people who don't feel the need to impress have discovered something that makes admiration look hollow: self-respect. And here's the difference. Admiration is external. It can be given and taken away. Self-respect is internal. Once you have it, no one can touch it. Admiration requires an audience. Self-respect only requires you. But here's what this means in real life. People who don't need to impress can walk away from opportunities that compromise their values. They can say no to things that look good but feel wrong. They can choose the path that's right for them over the path that impresses others. And here's the part that's revolutionary. When you have self-respect, you stop needing admiration. Because you already have something better. You have your own approval. And that's enough. But here's what nobody prepares you for. Building self-respect means disappointing people. It means being misunderstood. It means watching others get praised for things you could do but choose not to, because it's not aligned with who you are. And people who don't need to impress have accepted that cost. Because they'd rather respect themselves in private than be admired by strangers who don't actually know them. The psychology of people who don't feel the need to impress isn't about superiority or indifference. It's about freedom. Freedom from the exhausting performance of trying to control what others think. Freedom from the addiction of external validation. Freedom from betraying yourself to fit someone else's expectations. They're not cold. They're not arrogant. They're not lacking ambition. They've just realized that impressing people is a full-time job with no benefits. And they quit. And here's what most people will never understand. That decision takes more courage than performing ever could, because it means standing alone sometimes. It means being misunderstood. It means letting go of validation you desperately wanted. But it also means being free. And once you've tasted that freedom, you can't go back. So if you're someone who doesn't feel the need to impress, know this: you're not missing out. You're not broken. You're not less than people who perform louder, achieve bigger, or validate harder. You've just found something most people spend their entire lives searching for. You've found yourself. And you've decided that's enough. The world will keep trying to make you prove your worth, but you know better. Your worth isn't up for debate. It's not determined by how many people notice you, like you, or validate you. It's determined by how you see yourself when no one's watching. And you've already done that work. Are you someone who doesn't feel the need to impress others? Drop a comment and tell us what freed you from that performance. If this resonated, hit subscribe. We break down the psychology of people who live differently. And smash that like button. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it. You don't need to impress anyone. You're already enough.